Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today to Adaptable Behavior Explained. My name is Kelly O'Horo, and I'm your host, and I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to talk today about a topic that we hear all the time by laypersons as a therapist, and the two things that we're going to talk about are projection and blame. And we're going to learn why do we do it and how do we stop, most importantly, because it really clouds connection and helps us to create dysfunction and conflict in our relationships. And so ultimately, we want to improve and learn about projection, and we want to learn about blame. And you know who you are. Raise your hand if you're someone who projects or someone who blames, or people in your life tell you that you do that often. This is going to be a good show for you to tune into. So we're going to talk about the purpose of it and how those habits really damage our relationships. And we're going to understand why we do these things and how they're adaptations of trauma. Yes, I know that I talk about it all the time, but really every action that we do in our life was learned. And some of those things that we learned are not so useful. And so we're going to learn what we do and then learn what we don't want to do and then unlearn those things. So hopefully you'll find a lot of help with this one. I'm sure those who love you will find this a benefit in your life if you are someone who projects or blames regularly. So projection, let's start there. Most of our clients come in and, let's face it, they talk about other people in their lives. And this is often the function of projection. In relationships, we often project our own emotions onto others. And this means that we're attributing our own feelings, our thoughts, and our motives to someone else. The bad news is projection is a defense mechanism, and it helps us avoid facing uncomfortable aspects of ourselves. For example, if we feel insecure about our own abilities, we might accuse others of being incompetent. This way, we don't have to look at ourselves. We don't have to confront our own insecurities directly. So I'm going to give you an example of a friend of mine. She was dating this guy, and they were doing really well, about 8 months going strong. And, you know, she's also a therapist, so she does the initial kind of interview in her early dating times, and she's checking in, you know, is the guy confident? Is he secure? Is he wanting to learn how to communicate better? Are we going to address things head on? And so she thought she kind of did her due diligence. And now let me paint you a picture. This girl is kind of a butterfly. She is friendly. Some might even call her flirtatious, but ultimately that's just part of her personality. And she's just lovely. And her intention is always really pure. Now, she might accidentally hurt somebody, but she's not doing that with intention to do so. She just doesn't have ill will. And if you know her, you know this about her. So anyways, she's dating this guy for a while. And, you know, it's clear that some of his insecurities begin to creep up. And he starts projecting his fears onto her. And so let me give you a little background. So she has this guy friend. She's been friends with him for a long time, and it's totally platonic. And he's friends with other people in her life and her childhood friend. You know, they've known each other since high school, and there's never been anything romantic. And she's close to him, and she spends a lot of time with him. And the new guy she's dating, his insecurities like drove him into so much projection that he sabotaged the relationship. And he's accusing her of being unfaithful or disrespectful when she absolutely wasn't. At a minimum, maybe not communicative enough, but not anything harmful. And so ultimately, you know, his fears, his insecurities get projected onto her because he doesn't want to look at how he feels when she's in the presence of another man, even though she's not doing anything that's going to hurt him. And even though she's clear and has expressed who this person is to her, he just can't get past his own insecurities. And as a result, he projects onto her, and they ultimately break up. And she's so heartbroken about it because he's a really good guy, but he can't get his own stuff in check. And so we want to really make sure that we're not projecting our pain points onto the people that we're involved with. So next, we're going to talk about blame. And this is very easy to do. I don't know about you, but it's very easy to find yourself into this quick reaction when something goes wrong. And it's also a defense mechanism, blame is. And so it serves a purpose in order to discharge your pain and discomfort. When we blame others, we're often trying to avoid facing our own painful emotions. So if we shift responsibility to someone else, we can temporarily relieve ourselves of the burden of our own distress. This is particularly prevalent in situations where we feel powerless or overwhelmed. And ultimately, there are moments in our lives where we feel this powerlessness and this overwhelm so regularly, from, not being able to find your kid's other shoe on their way out the door. And then we bark at one of our other children like it's their fault. These moments happen so quickly where we fall into blame, and it happens in our partner relationships as well. And so I'm going to talk about some of the forms that this blame shows up in. The first is an emotional reaction, and this is really a common time that we see blame. So, for example, you always make me so angry. This shifts the responsibility for our own anger onto our partner, the person that we're discussing or we're in relationship with, rather than acknowledging our own personal triggers about our powerlessness or whatever pulls us into those unresolved issues. And ultimately, we are shooting out that blame so that we can discharge our own pain and our own discomfort. And it causes problems in our relationships. And so we need to take accountability for that. The other thing that we're trying to, get away from related to blame is taking accountability for our own personal failures. So, like, if we were to say, if it wasn't for you, I would have achieved my goals by now. This places the blame for our lack of success onto the person that we're talking to, usually our partner. They're the one that gets the worst of us typically. And then we are avoiding our self-reflection on our own choices or our own circumstances, our own lack of initiative that would have put us in a place where we could potentially reach our goals. The other thing that we do this with is relationship issues. And so maybe we're saying something like we're in conflict or we fall into our negative interaction cycle often. So then we say something like, our relationship is falling apart because you never listen to me. So we're focusing the responsibility onto somebody else instead of looking at the dynamic. And so this purpose is to deflect from our own communication issues, our own unwillingness to address things, our own unwillingness to compromise, or to really hear the other person and what they're expressing. Something I hear a lot on my couch is people blaming related to financial problems. And what I really tend to see, especially, not to have gender specific assumptions, but if in a gender stereotype, maybe the female doesn't take as much responsibility about the spending. And then, he comes in and he says, we're always broke because you spend too much money. This ignores how his lack of responsibility related to maybe the daily things that she has to buy for the kids and their sports and their activities and the food and all of these other things that come at us. And let's say the female is spending all of these things, but he doesn't know anything about that. And so he comes in with this blaming statement about money, and it totally ignores the complexities of financial management, shared responsibilities and budgeting, and like regular communication about what things cost. And I used a man versus woman perspective, but the tables could be flipped easily. And I hear both on my couch when it comes to blame about financial issues in relationships. Another time that people will use blame is when they talk about their own social interactions or connections or social isolation. So someone might say, like, in a relationship, I don't have any friends because you don't like socializing, or, you don't like anybody, so I'm always alone, or we can't make any new friends because of that. And so that's blame. It overlooks our own role in maintaining social connections. We have to take responsibility for our own interactions, and we have to have a need for mutual agreement on social activities and conversations about what we want to do and what we don't want to do. Just yesterday, I'll give you an example. My husband and I were talking about what we wanted to do, and I was super antsy and I needed to get some exercise. So I, called my friend and said, can we go for a walk? And, my husband didn't want to go. And I was like, oh, but I really want to be with you. But he was able to say, you go do what you need to do. It's clear you need to get out and get moving. And so go take care of that. I'll meet up with you later. And so we had this conversation. But a lot of times, had I left and not discussed it with him, he might have blamed me for us not having any time together. Or maybe I would have blamed him for not interacting with me, and we would have been in this blame cycle. So it happens often in how we exchange and negotiate our time in relationships with others. Probably the most frequent time I hear couples blaming is when it comes to parenting. And maybe one person has a more assertive style, one person has a more aggressive style. And a parent will come in and, report like, the kids are acting out because you're too lenient with them, or they get away with murder because you never discipline. And so this can be so that we're avoiding addressing our own parenting style and the need for a more unified approach to discipline. And so ultimately, these are just a few ways that I see blame show up. ultimately to deflect responsibility and really avoid dealing with a deeper issue that's coming up, usually related to emotion or responsibility. And so, if we recognize these patterns, it can help us take a more introspective approach and then ultimately work towards healthier communication and better relationship dynamics. So, now we're going to talk about how this happens, projection and blame, and where these things come from. And that always goes back to trauma. And we have to understand trauma and how our body works in order to recognize what's going on. And so, trauma is really powerlessness or things that happen to us that we weren't prepared to handle. And trauma can cause feeling flashbacks where those past emotions and sensations are triggered by the current stimulus in our environment. And so, a simple example might be, let's say I was a kid and I got hit with a baseball. And now, when I'm moving forward, I'm somewhere else and I see something flying through the head. And because I was hit as a kid, I flinch, or I really am overreactive with a physical response to perception of getting hit because I've got some unresolved stuff in my childhood related to having been hit by a ball when I was little. But something that I see more often has to do with the relational aspects of triggers. And this is where someone is really over attuned to how someone else's presentation or their face looks. They're nervous about disconnection because of whatever happened in their childhood. So something as benign as a squinching of a face, or it can look like judgment or disappointment. And then in someone who sees that, who has a sensitive nervous system related to their own trauma, they perceive that squinching of the face to mean something about them. And so they're having a feeling flashback. And these feeling flashbacks make us believe that our intense feelings are due to a present situation, when in fact, they are rooted in past experiences. Trauma often leads to these adaptations like projection and blame as a way to cope with the unresolved pain that has happened because of stuff that isn't now. And so these mechanisms can become ingrained patterns that affect our relationships and overall well-being in our connections. And so the good news is we can heal these things. So I love this phrase that I heard about healing. I don't know if I saw it on Instagram or Facebook or somewhere, but I just love it. And it was something like this, like, if we don't heal our wounds, then we bleed on those who didn't cut us. So this means that our unresolved trauma, it can negatively impact our current relationships. And I love this little adage that one of my early mentors shared with me. And it's just a simple rule of thumb that if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if you have a hysterical response, an intense emotional reaction, we know that it's often tied to a past experience. And so if you're hijacked, you want to recognize this is the past, it's not now. And recognizing it can help us to understand that our reactions might be disproportionate to what's going on currently. So we have something to teach you to determine whether you're triggered and your rejection or your reaction rather is yours and it's old, and how to find your way back to its original source. So as an EMDR therapist, we use this all the time, and this is for us to determine where the roots are. And so let me give you a little background. We use a scale called the subjective units of disturbance. It's a scale that helps us to gauge an intensity of emotions. And we say where 0 is neutral and 10 is the most disturbing that we can imagine. And so if we rate our current feelings, and this is how you're going to use it, so listen up. If you rate your current feelings of what's happening to you and the intensity is greater than a 4, it's likely that that reaction right now is yours and it's old. And so we can get curious about when we might have felt this way before. So I'm going to teach you how to pair up the way memory is encoded so that you can help yourself figure out the roots of why you're showing up the way that you show up. First of all, is it hysterical? Okay, it's historical. I'm disturbed over a 4. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the emotions that I'm feeling right now. Am I angry? Am I sad? Am I hurt? Am I helpless? Am I confused? What's going on in me? These are the one-word things, emotions. We're going to connect with our current emotions, and we're going to focus on what's happening in our body, the sensations, and the thoughts that we're having. So we're going to check in. Am I over a 4? Disturbance. What am I feeling emotionally? And I know it sounds like a lot, but if you practice it, it's going to get easier. What am I feeling emotionally? I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm hurt. And then where do I feel it? I feel my chest tightening. I feel my shoulders tightening. I notice that I'm getting a little bit hotter. And then what am I thinking? What are the thoughts that I'm thinking to myself? I can't trust. I'm not safe. No matter what I do, it's never enough. And so when I hold these items together, these components of the way memory gets encoded, I can just slow myself down, and in my mind's eye, I can float back in our subconscious, much like skipping a stone on the water. We don't want to go deep. We just want to skip the stone along the top of the water with those things in mind. And we take ourselves back to other times that feel familiar. So in our work, we call that a float back or a bridge technique, but we're ultimately pulling those aspects of memory that are triggering us in the now, and we're floating back in trauma time to figure out where this started, these unresolved memories that got maladaptively encoded. And so we've got to, look at our current distressing emotions, beliefs. We float back, we figure it out, and then we can bridge the gap between our present reaction and our past experiences, which ultimately allows us to process and heal underlying trauma. And so oftentimes we can't really do much with that on our own except for know, and we can attribute our reaction now. We stop projecting, we stop blaming, we recognize this is mine and it's old. We get more responsible. We might slow ourselves down and we might not do anything with it, or we might ask for a break. So we'll have less damaging interactions in our relationships. Now, the good news is you can heal from this so that the stimulus today doesn't bother you anymore, and it just becomes like a thing that happened in your past, and it's not happening now, and you're able to tell the difference. But let me say a little bit about that. In order to do that, you have to do a bottom-up therapy. My preference is EMDR therapy. You can combine it with somatic experiencing, with sensory motor. If you want to learn more about the types of therapy that are effective with this kind of work, I've got another couple of shows. We'll go ahead and put that in the description for you so that you can link up to it. But ultimately, you can get help with these triggers. But until you heal, because it takes time, I'm going to give you some tips to manage your behavior or your reactions that can shift your nervous system response. So here goes. So when we perceive a threat, our body's sympathetic nervous system activates. It's the fight, it's the flight response. And sometimes it's submit or shut down. So here's some natural ways that we can bypass that parasympathetic nervous system response, and we can shift our nervous system. So the number one easy thing to do, it's free, it's timely, and you always have access to it, is a breathing technique. Now you hear this all the time on every Instagram post and every other person that talks about coping skills, but oftentimes we don't talk about how to do it. So I'm going to walk you through, my favorite breathing technique, and I'm going to share a little bit with you about that. So again, breathing, it's always with you. It's the first and most effective way to change states. It helps us regulate our nervous system, and it can quickly calm our body. It can shift us. So the first one I want to talk about, this breathing technique, is called the 4-7-8 method. It was pioneered by a Harvard-trained Dr. Andrew Weil, and it's described as a natural tranquilizer for the nervous system. It helps us to quickly reduce that tension and allows the body to relax. So here are the steps. You're going to inhale through your nose for a count of 4. So, and then you're going to hold your breath for the count of 7. And we're going to breathe in through our nose, and we're going to have the tip of our tongue right behind our teeth. So we're breathing in for 4, and then holding for 7. And then we're going to exhale deeply through our mouth for the count of 8. So it's in for 4, hold for 7, and exhale. All the way down to where it's hard to breathe. So let's do it together once. We'll inhale through our nose. Whew, that feels better already. So you're going to repeat this cycle just a few times, knowing that it promotes relaxation and it helps reduce anxiety. The next one we're going to do is called box breathing. And this one I don't like quite as well because you need to do more cycles of it. And I like that you can get, 3 cycles in the first one, the 4-7-8 breath, and then you're really just shifted from that nervous system response. And so box breathing, the steps are as follows. We're going to inhale slowly through your nose to the count of 4. You're going to hold your breath for a count of 4. You're going to exhale slowly out your mouth to the count of 4. Okay? And then you hold on to your breath again for the count of 4. So the cycle repeats. So let's do it together. We're going to inhale for 4. So this box breath is really effective. And again, it'll totally shift your nervous system response. And so again, you're going to repeat this cycle a few times, and ultimately it'll regulate your breathing, reduce your stress, and increase your focus. Now, let's say you've done that and you're still feeling a little bit of amped up and you need a little bit more to disengage from that state-specific trigger. Physical activity is great. If you engage in something that's strenuous for just a brief moment, it helps to automatically shift the state from fight or flight, and it shows your body that I took care of it, I handled it. And so when we have this trigger and there's a perception of threat, some examples, and I'm not going to model these for you, but you can go for a quick sprint because a quick burst of running can help release that built up tension. And it ultimately tricks your body into thinking that you escaped, that you ran. You can do pull-ups because it can engage multiple muscle groups and provides a physical challenge. You could do push-ups. You can do that anywhere, and it helps you focus your energy and reduces those feelings of anxiety. But ultimately, anything that requires some additional exertion will help shift that state. But again, I always fall back to breathing because it's always with you and it's fairly quick and it automatically shifts that nervous system response. So ultimately, these activities can regulate your nervous system, helps provide you a sense of control over your body's response to stress. It's going to limit your projection and your blame oftentimes. Another thing that I like to do that I've adopted this past year is cold plunging. But cold exposure can switch the nervous system response by it takes your natural response into a stress response, and then when you leave that cold, it stops it. So this could even be just a cold shower. And nobody wants to take a cold shower, but it quickly shifts your body's focus, and then it reduces your stress when you're done. And like I said, I started cold plunging regularly, do at least 12 minutes a week. And I know that has helped me really recognize when I'm in a state of stress, and ultimately helps me switch that more quickly now. So the cold plunging really gives you a normal awareness of the calming effects in your body when you're not in that state. It helps you to shift quickly. So with these practices regularly in your daily routine, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, it can help make a significant difference in your recognition of stress in your body. And ultimately, just like everything, consistency is key to seeing long-term benefits, but these things don't cost any money. And I want you to just try a few of these techniques to find out what works best for you. And you want to remember that healing is not linear. We can continue to get better over time, and recognize that when we do get it wrong, we want to circle back. We want to acknowledge our mistake, and we want to recognize that when we've reacted based on a trauma response rather than the current situation, we've got to take accountability. We want to apologize if it's necessary, and I think it's helpful to explain to your partner how this happened, what it was connected to, so that they realize you see the pattern, and that gives them some hope that these changes will happen, because we're learning from our experiences so that we can improve our future responses. And so as a wrap up, we talked today about projection, we talked about blame as a trauma response, and we talked about how to determine the root causes of these adaptations. We learned a little bit about how to manage them while we're healing from them, and that there is a way to heal with EMDR therapy or other bottom-up approaches when we have the reaction to our current stimulus and it's creating some of those propensities like projection and blame that we don't really want to have. And so I hope that you found this conversation helpful. Make sure you share it with a friend if you know someone's going through some tough moments in their relationships, or you know they get stuck in blame or projection, or someone that you trust or that trusts you to share with them. This is a good resource to help them realize there is a way out. We all get stuck in these hard cycles, and we want to know that there's a way to change. So hopefully you found some benefit there. So until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.